I said, sit down. Are you deaf or just stupid? Judge Richard Caldwell doesn't even look up from his papers when he barks the command. The words sliced through the courtroom like a whip crack. Marcus Johnson, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, remains standing. Caldwell's head snaps up, his pale face flushing red. He slams his gavel so hard it echoes off the marble walls. Typical. Probably can't even read the charges against you. Marcus slowly takes his seat, spine straight, eyes forward. His leather briefcase rests beside him, gold initials MJ gleaming under the harsh lights. Reckless endangerment, disturbing the peace, resisting arrest. Caldwell's voice drips venom. 60 days in the county jail. Next time, maybe you'll think twice before acting like you own the place. The sentence lands like a sledgehammer. Have you ever seen someone's world flip upside down in 60 seconds? What happens next will leave you speechless. Judge Richard Caldwell built his reputation on one simple principle. The law meant order, and order meant knowing your place. For 15 years, his courtroom had been a monument to that philosophy. The mahogany-paneled walls bore witness to his unwavering commitment to what he called practical justice. Justice isn't about feelings, Caldwell would tell new clerks, settling into his high-backed leather chair like a king on his throne. It's about maintaining the natural order of society. Some people understand respect, others need to be taught. The statistics spoke volumes, though no one dared speak them aloud. When Marcus Williams appeared before him for assault charges, 18 months in county jail. When Bradley Thompson faced identical charges just 3 weeks later, 6 months probation and community service. The difference, Marcus was black, Bradley was white. But Caldwell would call it considering character and background. Look at the defendant's history, Caldwell would intone during sentencing, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Look at where they come from. Look at their associations. The pause before associations always lingered, heavy with unspoken meaning. His colleagues at the monthly judicial conference would nod approvingly. Caldwell's tough but fair, they'd say over expensive scotch at the country club. Don't let them get away with anything. That's why his district stays so peaceful. The truth was uglier, much uglier. When Kesha Roberts, a young black attorney, tried to object during a domestic violence hearing, Caldwell had silenced her with surgical precision. Counselor, perhaps you should focus on learning proper courtroom procedure before attempting to lecture this court. His tone suggested she was a child playing dress-up in her grandmother's clothes. Kesha's white colleague, David Martinez, made the exact same objection 15 minutes later. Caldwell's response sustained. Thank you for bringing that to my attention, Counselor. The pattern repeated itself courtroom after courtroom, case after case. Black defendants received sentences 30 to 40% harsher than their white counterparts for identical crimes. Black attorneys found their motions dismissed with barely a glance. Black families in the gallery were warned about disruptions for reactions that white families displayed without consequence. But Caldwell was careful, brilliant even. He never used slurs, never made overtly racist statements on the record. Instead, he weaponized respectability politics and coded language with the precision of a surgeon. This defendant clearly lacks the moral foundation necessary for rehabilitation, he would declare when sentencing young black men. For young white men with identical records, this appears to be an unfortunate lapse in judgment. I'm confident this young man can learn from his mistakes. The media loved him. Judge Caldwell, tough on crime, strong on values. Read the headline in the State Tribune when his name surfaced for appellate court consideration. The article painted him as a non-nonsense jurist who didn't let political correctness interfere with justice. What the article didn't mention were the hushed conversations in courthouse bathrooms, the worried whispers among public defenders, the way black court reporters requested transfers to other divisions. He's got it out for us. Tony Washington, a veteran public defender, confided to his colleague after Caldwell sentenced his 18-year-old client 2 years for marijuana possession. Same amount of weed. White kid from the suburbs gets diverted to rehab. My kid gets prison. But Washington, like everyone else, kept his voice down. Caldwell wielded power like a medieval lord. Cross him and suddenly your motions took longer to process. Your clients found themselves with harsher bail conditions. Your professional life became a minefield of bureaucratic obstacles. The breaking point should have come during the Jefferson case. Malik Jefferson, 23, college graduate, no prior record, caught with a small amount of cocaine during a traffic stop. The prosecution recommended probation and community service. Mr. Jefferson, Caldwell had announced, his voice echoing through the packed courtroom. You had every opportunity to make something of yourself. Instead, you chose the easy path of criminality that too many of your community seemed to prefer it. Malik's mother gasped audibly from the gallery. Caldwell's gavel struck like lightning. Ma'am, control yourself or remove yourself from my courtroom. 2 years in state prison. Perhaps that will provide the discipline you clearly lacked at home. The same week, Connor Bradley faced identical charges. Same amount of drugs, same circumstances, same prosecutor recommending probation. Mr. Bradley, this clearly represents poor judgment during a difficult period in your life. 6 months probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. Don't waste this opportunity. The disparity was staggering, but who would challenge it? Caldwell's reputation for maintaining order made him untouchable. Appeals were routinely denied. Complaints to the Judicial Oversight Board disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. Behind closed doors, Caldwell's mask slipped completely. These people think they can waltz into my courtroom and demand special treatment, he told his law clerk during a private chambers conference. My grandfather didn't fight in World War II so these criminals could lecture me about fairness. His secretary, Maria Santos, quietly documented everything. Not because she planned to expose him, but because she'd learned that survival in Caldwell's domain required careful notes. He fired assistants who didn't understand the importance of supporting judicial authority. The promotion to appellate court seemed inevitable. Caldwell's conviction rate spoke for itself. His sentences were rarely overturned on appeal. The legal establishment saw him as exactly what the system needed, unwavering, uncompromising, unafraid to make tough decisions. What they didn't see were the families torn apart by his sentencing disparities. The young men who emerged from prison were hardened and hopeless. The attorneys who stopped taking cases in his district. The slow but steady erosion of trust in a system that preached equality while practicing prejudice. 3 months before that fateful traffic stop, Caldwell received unofficial confirmation that the appellate nomination was his. He celebrated with his usual circle at the country club, accepting congratulations on his distinguished career of public service. Richard's exactly what this state needs, proclaimed Senator Williams, raising his glass. Someone who understands that compassion without accountability isn't justice at all. The irony was lost on everyone present. In Caldwell's world, accountability flowed in only one direction. But power, even judicial power, has limits. And sometimes those limits arrive in the most unexpected forms. Sometimes they arrive carrying a briefcase with the initials MJ. Sometimes they arrive wearing an expensive suit and maintaining perfect composure while absorbing insults designed to break their spirit. Sometimes justice arrives disguised as the very thing you've spent your career trying to destroy. Judge Richard Caldwell was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The state attorney's office on 7th Street hummed with controlled chaos at 8:30 on a Tuesday morning. Young prosecutors clutched coffee cups like lifelines. Paralegals wheeled document boxes through marble corridors and phones rang with the relentless urgency of justice delayed. Marcus Johnson walked through the main entrance with the measured pace of someone who owned the building, which in many ways he did. "Excuse me," called Jennifer Kim, the new Victim Services Coordinator, intercepting him at the security desk. "Sir, if you're here to file a complaint, you'll need to take the elevator to the 3rd floor." And Marcus paused, studying her with calm eyes. "Thank you, Miss Kim. I'll find my way." The security guard, Danny Rodriguez, looked up from his newspaper and did a double take. "Morning, sir," he said, suddenly straightening his posture. "Didn't expect to see you this early." Jennifer's face flushed crimson. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize." "No apology necessary," Marcus replied smoothly. "He happens more often than you'd think." He continued toward the elevator bank, his Italian leather briefcase swinging slightly with each step. Behind him, he heard Danny explaining in hushed tones, "That's Marcus Johnson, lead prosecutor. Been here longer than most of the judges." The elevator doors closed on Jennifer's mortified expression. On the 5th floor, the atmosphere changed immediately. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Assistants looked up from their keyboards. The energy in the room shifted like a tide, recognizing its moon. "Morning, boss," called out Sarah Martinez, his senior deputy, barely glancing up from a stack of case files. "The Caldwell materials are on your desk. Statistical analysis came in at midnight. It's comprehensive." Marcus nodded, continuing to his corner office. Through the glass walls, he could see his team had been busy. Charts and graphs covered every available surface. Bankers' boxes lined the walls like soldiers in formation. Inside his office, the scope of the investigation revealed itself. 15 years of sentencing data organized by race, crime type, and outcome. The pattern wasn't subtle, it was surgical. His phone buzzed. "Johnson Marcus, it's David Carter at Statistical Services. You need to see these numbers. I ran the analysis 3 times because I couldn't believe the disparity." "How bad?" 42% harsher sentences for black defendants compared to white defendants with identical charges and criminal histories. In some categories, it's over 60%. "I've never seen anything like this." Marcus made a note. "Send everything to my secure email. And David, this stays between us until I give you the green light, of course." "But Marcus, this is going to destroy careers." "That's the point." After hanging up, Marcus opened his laptop and pulled up the official state attorney database. His clearance level allowed access to sealed records, judicial performance reviews, and disciplinary complaints. 3 hours later, he had what he needed. Judge Richard Caldwell wasn't just biased. He was systematically, methodically, brilliantly biased. His assistant knocked softly. "Sir, Ada Williams is here about the Morrison case. Send him in." Tony Williams entered, closing the door behind him. "Marcus, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. The Caldwell situation. Maybe we should involve the Federal Civil Rights Division before." "No." Marcus's voice was quiet but absolute. "This stays state level. We handle our own house. But if we're talking about systematic civil rights violations, Tony, how many cases have you tried in Caldwell's courtroom?" "Maybe 24 over the years." "Why?" Marcus turned his computer screen toward him. "Because according to this data, your black clients received sentences averaging 38% harsher than your white clients for comparable crimes." Tony's face went pale. "Jesus Christ, it's not your fault. He's been playing this game for 15 years and he's very good at it. But that ends now. What's your plan?" Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking down at the courthouse across the street. From this angle, he could see Caldwell's chambers on the 4th floor. "The plan is evidence. Overwhelming, undeniable, bulletproof evidence. But there's one piece missing." "What's that?" "Personal experience. Every defense attorney in the city has stories about Caldwell's bias, but they're all hearsay. What we need is a prosecutor experiencing it firsthand." Tony frowned. "How do you arrange that? It's not like you can just walk into his courtroom and he stopped." "Marcus number. Tell me you're not thinking what I think you're thinking." Marcus smiled for the first time that morning. "Sometimes the best way to catch a predator is to become the prey. You're talking about deliberately getting yourself arrested, getting a criminal charge just to appear before Caldwell. I'm talking about providing the final piece of evidence that will end his career. That's insane. If this goes wrong, if anyone finds out you orchestrated it, then I lose my job. But if I don't do this, how many more Marcus Williams cases will happen? How many more Malik Jeffersons get 2 years for what Connor Bradley gets probation?" The room fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic 5 floors below. Finally, Tony spoke. "What do you need from me?" "Complete deniability. When this happens, you know nothing. Your shock has to be genuine. And the rest of the team, same thing. The fewer people who know, the better." Marcus returned to his desk and opened a different file. "There's something else. My brother Michael got pulled over in Caldwell's district last month. Speeding ticket, but the officer noted aggressive behavior and failure to comply with lawful orders. Those are misdemeanors that could easily be upgraded to exactly. All I need is the right traffic stop in the right jurisdiction." Tony shook his head. "You're putting your entire career on the line. My career doesn't matter if the system is broken. And Tony, it's not just broken. It's been weaponized." After Tony left, Marcus sat alone in his office, studying the wall of evidence he'd assembled. 15 years of systematic injustice documented with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a saint. His phone buzzed with a text message. Meeting with appellate nomination committee moved to next week. Congratulations in advance, Senator Williams, Marcus smiled grimly. Caldwell's promotion timeline just became his deadline. Justice, he reflected, required perfect timing. The law degree from Harvard Law hung on the wall like a certificate of war. Next to it, Yale's Master of Laws diploma caught the amber glow of the desk lamp. Below both, 3 Prosecutor of the Year awards gleamed in polished frames. Their gold lettering a testament to 15 years of relentless pursuit of justice. But tonight, Marcus Johnson wasn't thinking about accolades. He was thinking about Michael. His younger brother's voice still echoed in his mind from that phone call 3 weeks ago. Marcus, I need a lawyer. Good one. This white cop man, he was looking for a reason. The traffic stop had been textbook harassment. Michael driving his new BMW through Caldwell's district after a client meeting pulled over for allegedly weaving between lanes. The officer's report painted a picture of an aggressive, uncooperative black male who appeared to be reaching for something and failed to immediately comply with lawful orders. Marcus knew the script by heart. He'd seen it play out in Caldwell's courtroom dozens of times. What made it worse was Michael's impeccable record. MBA from Wharton, senior vice president at Morrison Financial, married father of 2, active in his church, never so much as a parking ticket. The perfect defendant to prove that none of those things mattered when you stood before Judge Richard Caldwell. Marcus opened his laptop and pulled up the case management system. Michael's hearing was scheduled for next Thursday. Routine traffic violations, but the resisting arrest charge elevated it to Caldwell's jurisdiction. Baby brother always was too trusting, Marcus muttered, scrolling through similar cases. The pattern was always the same. Black professionals thinking their credentials would protect them. Black families believing the system would recognize their dignity. They learned otherwise in Caldwell's courtroom. His home office had become a war room. 3 bankers' boxes contained 15 years of meticulously organized case files. Sentencing disparities arranged by crime type, defendant race, and attorney representation. The statistical evidence was overwhelming, but statistics never told the human story. Marcus pulled out a red folder marked personal impact. Inside were letters from families whose lives Caldwell had destroyed. Photos of young men who entered his courtroom with hope and left with felony convictions that would follow them forever. Malik Jefferson's mother had written, "Judge Caldwell looked at my son like he was garbage. 2 years in prison for something that white boy got probation for. Same crime, same amount of drugs, but my Malik didn't have the right skin color." Marcus's phone buzzed. Text from his wife. "Working late again. Dinner's getting cold." He typed back, "Almost finished. Save me a plate." But he wasn't almost finished. He was just beginning. The plan crystallized as he studied his calendar. Thursday morning, Michael's hearing. Thursday afternoon, the appellate nomination committee meeting where Caldwell's promotion would be fast-tracked. Perfect timing. Marcus opened a secure folder on his laptop labeled Operation Evidence. Inside were detailed profiles of every prosecutor in his office. Their case loads, their availability, their likelihood to be assigned emergency cases. What he needed was simple. Get arrested in Caldwell's district for charges serious enough to warrant immediate arraignment, but minor enough to avoid federal involvement. The resisting arrest and aggressive behavior charges from Michael's case provided the template. His private cell phone rang. The caller ID showed his college roommate from Harvard. Judge Patricia Thompson, Circuit Court. "Patricia, I didn't expect to hear from you this late. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer. Are you building a case against Richard Caldwell?" Silence stretched between them like a tightrope. "Why would you ask that?" "Because his name came up in a very quiet conversation at the judicial conference last week. Someone mentioned unusual activity in prosecutor records requests, specifically sentencing data from his district." Marcus chose his words carefully. If hypothetically someone were investigating systematic judicial bias, what would your advice be? Patricia's sigh carried the weight of 20 years on the bench. "My advice would be to be very, very careful. Caldwell has powerful friends, but Marcus, if someone were hypothetically building such a case, they'd have my full support. What he's been doing, it's destroying faith in the entire system. Hypothetically speaking, of course." After hanging up, Marcus opened his secure email and composed a message to his most trusted deputy. Sarah, I need you to clear your calendar for Friday morning. Emergency federal civil rights consultation. Tell no one. And Sarah, if something happens to me Thursday, you're acting as lead prosecutor until further notice. He encrypted the message and hit send. On his desk, Michael's case file lay open next to Marcus's official prosecutor credentials. Two paths diverged in the yellow wood of justice, and Marcus was about to take the one that would make all the difference. He picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. Danny, it's Marcus Johnson. I need a favor. A big one. The conference room on the 8th floor of the federal building had seen its share of watershed moments. Civil rights violations, corruption scandals, judicial misconduct cases that reshaped entire districts. But the atmosphere this Wednesday morning carried a different weight. The electric tension of a reckoning 15 years in the making. Dr. Angela Foster, the state's leading expert in judicial statistics, spread her charts across the mahogany table like a prosecutor laying out murder weapons. Each graph told the same story with mathematical precision, systematic racial bias elevated to an art form. Gentlemen, ladies, she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. In 30 years of analyzing judicial patterns, I have never encountered disparities this severe. The room held its breath. Present were representatives from the State Judicial Board, the Attorney General's office, and 3 federal civil rights investigators who had driven up from Atlanta the night before. Judge Richard Caldwell's sentencing patterns show a 42% disparity in average sentence length between black and white defendants for identical crimes with comparable criminal histories. Foster's laser pointer traced the red line across her projection screen. For context, the average statewide disparity is 12%, which itself is considered problematic. Board Chairman William Hayes, a veteran of 40 years in legal administration, leaned forward. Dr. Foster, what's the margin of error in your analysis? Less than 2%. I ran the numbers 4 separate times using different methodologies. The pattern is consistent across all crime categories, all sentence types, and all demographic factors except race. The federal investigator, Agent Monica Rodriguez, consulted her notes. Doctor, can you walk us through specific case comparisons? Foster clicked to the next slide. 2 photos appeared side by side. Marcus Williams, age 19, and Connor Bradley, age 20. Both defendants were charged with assault in the 3rd degree. Both first-time offenders. Both represented by experienced public defenders. Both cases occurred within 6 weeks of each other. She clicked again. Court documents filled the screen. Williams, 18 months county jail, 2 years probation, mandatory anger management classes. Bradley, 6 months probation, community service, voluntary counseling. A murmur rippled through the room. That's just one example. I documented 47 similar comparisons. The pattern never varies. Black defendants receive systematically harsher sentences for identical crimes. Hayes shifted uncomfortably. What about mitigating factors? Character witnesses, employment history, family circumstances. I controlled for all variables. In fact, many of the black defendants had superior educational backgrounds and employment records compared to their white counterparts who received lighter sentences. Foster advanced to her next slide, a timeline spanning 15 years. The pattern began immediately after Caldwell took the bench and has remained consistent throughout his tenure. We're not talking about unconscious bias or occasional lapses in judgment. This represents systematic, intentional discrimination. Agent Rodriguez made a note. Doctor, did you analyze plea bargain patterns? Excellent question. Black defendants in Caldwell's district are 38% more likely to reject plea deals and proceed to trial. When I interviewed public defenders, the reason became clear. Caldwell's plea conferences are so hostile toward black defendants that attorneys advise their clients to take their chances with a jury. A new voice spoke from the back of the room. What about appellate reversals? Foster turned toward Assistant Attorney General Karen Webb. That's perhaps the most disturbing finding. Caldwell's sentences are rarely appealed because most defendants can't afford the process and those that are appealed face an uphill battle. The appellate court gives tremendous deference to judicial discretion in sentencing. She clicked on a new chart showing appellate outcomes. Of the 18 successful appeals of Caldwell's sentences, 16 involved white defendants. 2 involved black defendants, and both were overturned on procedural grounds, not sentencing disparities. The room fell silent, except for the soft scratch of pens on legal pads. Hayes cleared his throat. "Dr. Foster, are you prepared to testify to these findings under oath?" "Absolutely. But there's more." Foster opened a thick binder and withdrew audio equipment. 3 weeks ago, I was contacted by Maria Santos, Judge Caldwell's former court reporter. She provided these recordings made during private chamber conferences over the past 2 years. She pressed play. Caldwell's voice filled the room, crisp and unmistakable. "These people think they can waltz into my courtroom and demand special treatment. My grandfather didn't fight in World War II, so these criminals could lecture me about fairness." The recording continued, chamber conversations revealing casual racism, deliberate sentence enhancements for black defendants, and explicit instructions to court staff about maintaining proper courtroom decorum when dealing with black families. In one particularly damning exchange, Caldwell could be heard telling his clerk, "Schedule the Jefferson sentencing for Thursday afternoon. I want him to sit in jail over the weekend thinking about his choices before I send him upstate." Agent Rodriguez stopped taking notes and started recording the session on her phone. The final recording was the most devastating. Caldwell speaking to his law clerk about the Morrison case. "The public defender wants probation for this punk. Claims he's a college student. I don't care if he graduated summa cum laude from Harvard. Put him away for 2 years. Maybe his friends will learn something." Foster turned off the recorder. The defendant in question, Thomas Morrison, had no prior record, was working 2 jobs to pay for college, and was caught with less than 2 grams of marijuana. An identical case involving a white defendant from the suburbs resulted in diversion to drug court. Hayes rubbed his temples. How many recordings are there? 47 hours of audio spanning 18 months. Miss Santos documented everything after Caldwell beered her for being too friendly with black attorneys. The federal investigator leaned forward. "Where is Ms. Santos now?" "Transferred to Judge Thompson's court 6 months ago. She's prepared to testify, but she's terrified." Caldwell destroyed 2 previous court reporters who crossed him. Assistant Attorney General Webb opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "Dr. Foster, are you aware that Judge Caldwell is currently under consideration for promotion to the state appellate court?" "I am now. The nomination committee meets tomorrow afternoon. If these findings are accurate, we need to move immediately." Foster gathered her materials. "There's one more thing. I was contacted yesterday by someone in the state prosecutor's office. They're conducting a parallel investigation. I can't reveal details, but I believe additional evidence is forthcoming." Hayes stood abruptly. "This meeting is adjourned. Dr. Foster, I need all your materials delivered to my office within the hour." "Agent Rodriguez, what's the federal government's position?" "We're opening a formal civil rights investigation as of this moment. Judge Caldwell's promotion is effectively suspended pending the outcome." As the room emptied, Foster lingered at the table, staring at her charts and graphs. 15 years of systematic injustice reduced to mathematical certainties and audio evidence. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Tomorrow morning, Caldwell's courtroom. Final evidence being delivered. Thank you for your courage. A friend of justice." Foster deleted the message and gathered her materials. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the federal building, and the first drops of rain began to fall against the windows. Justice, she reflected, often arrived with thunder. The courthouse clock struck 11:30 as Caldwell's gavel finished echoing through the marble chamber. Marcus Johnson stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, absorbing the weight of 60 days in county jail for what amounted to a traffic violation. "Court is adjourned," Caldwell announced, already reaching for his next file. The power rush of crushing another uppity defendant still coursed through his veins. "Bailiff, remove the defendant." But Marcus didn't move. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that cut through the courtroom chatter like a blade. "I request permission to address the court." Caldwell's head snapped up, his face flushing crimson. "The defendant has been sentenced. This matter is closed. Bailiff, remove this man immediately." "Your Honor," Marcus repeated louder now. "I am Marcus Johnson, lead prosecutor for the state of Georgia, Special Crimes Division." The words hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Court clerks froze at their desks. The bailiff's hand hovered over his handcuffs, uncertain whether to proceed. Caldwell's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. What did you say? Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew his official credentials. The gold badge caught the overhead lights as he held it high enough for everyone to see. Marcus Johnson, lead prosecutor. Badge number 47,291. I have served in this capacity for 15 years. The color drained from Caldwell's face so quickly he appeared to age 10 years in 10 seconds. His hands began to tremble as the magnitude of what he'd just done crashed over him like a tsunami. This is some kind of joke, Caldwell stammered, gripping the edge of his bench. You can't be. I mean, you're the defendant. You were arrested for driving while black in your district, Your Honor. Something I orchestrated specifically to experience your systematic bias firsthand. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Attorneys whispered urgently to each other. The bailiff looked between Marcus and Caldwell like a man watching a train wreck in slow motion. Marcus opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. For the record, Your Honor, I have been conducting an official investigation into systematic judicial misconduct in this district for the past 6 months. This morning's proceedings represent the final piece of evidence in a comprehensive case documenting 15 years of racially biased sentencing practices. Caldwell's voice came out as a hoarse whisper. You entrapped me. I exposed you. Marcus's voice remained perfectly calm, a stark contrast to Caldwell's growing panic. Every word you spoke, every gesture you made, every assumption you revealed about my character based solely on my appearance, it's all part of the official record now. The judge's clerk, a young white woman named Sarah, stared at Marcus with dawning recognition. She'd seen him before, not as a defendant, but in the prosecutor's parking garage, entering the building through the secure entrance reserved for senior staff. Your Honor, Marcus continued, I need to inform you that as of this moment, you are under formal investigation by the State Judicial Board, the Federal Civil Rights Division, and the Attorney General's Office for dramatic violation of defendants' constitutional rights. Caldwell tried to regain his composure, straightening in his chair. This is highly irregular. You can't just. There are proper channels. The proper channels have been exhausted for 15 years while you destroyed lives and perverted justice. Today, the proper channels found you. Marcus turned to address the packed courtroom gallery. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention in much larger venues. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, my name is Marcus Johnson. I serve as lead prosecutor for special crimes with jurisdiction over civil rights violations, judicial misconduct, and systematic abuse of power. This morning's proceedings were conducted under the authority of the State Attorney General's office as part of a comprehensive investigation. A reporter from Channel 7 stood up. Mr. Johnson, are you saying you deliberately got yourself arrested? I'm saying I provided Judge Caldwell with the opportunity to demonstrate the same bias he's shown toward hundreds of black defendants over the past 15 years. The only difference is that today the defendant had the resources to fight back. Caldwell made one last desperate attempt to salvage his authority. This court does not recognize these irregular proceedings. Bailiff, clear my courtroom immediately. But the bailiff remained motionless, staring at Marcus's prosecutor credentials with the expression of a man realizing he'd been watching history unfold without knowing it. Marcus smiled for the first time that morning. Your Honor, you no longer have the authority to clear anything. As of 11:45 a.m., you are suspended from judicial duties pending the outcome of our investigation. The gavel fell from Caldwell's nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. The transformation in the courtroom was electric. Marcus Johnson stood at the defendant's table, but his posture had shifted completely. Gone was the submissive stance of the accused. In its place stood the commanding presence of Georgia's most accomplished prosecutor. For the record, Marcus announced, his voice filling every corner of the chamber. The state of Georgia hereby files formal charges of judicial misconduct, civil rights violations, and systematic abuse of power against Judge Richard Caldwell. Caldwell gripped his gavel like a drowning man clutching driftwood. You can't do this. I am a sitting judge. There are procedures, protocols. There are indeed. Marcus opened his briefcase and withdrew a document bearing official state seals. This is an emergency suspension order signed by Chief Justice Maria Rodriguez at 8:15 this morning. You no longer possess judicial authority in this courtroom or any other." The words hit Caldwell like physical blows. His face cycled through shock, rage, and desperation as the reality of his situation crystallized. Furthermore, Marcus continued, consulting a second document, "This courtroom is now under the jurisdiction of the state prosecutor's office. Bailiff Martinez, please ensure all recording equipment remains active. Today's proceedings are being documented for federal review." Marcus turned toward the gallery where reporters scribbled frantically and cameras rolled without interruption. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed this morning represents the culmination of 6 months of investigation into systematic racial bias in this judicial district. The traffic stop, the arrest, the charges, all were orchestrated to capture Judge Caldwell's discriminatory practices in real time." He gestured toward Caldwell, who sat frozen behind the bench like a deer in headlights. Over the past 15 years, Judge Caldwell has systematically sentenced black defendants to terms averaging 42% harsher than white defendants for identical crimes. This morning, he demonstrated that same bias by sentencing me to 60 days in jail for violations that typically result in fines or probation. Channel 7's lead reporter stood up. "Mr. Johnson, what happened to Judge Caldwell's previous cases? Every sentence he imposed will be reviewed by an independent panel. Defendants who were victims of discriminatory sentencing will have their cases automatically eligible for appeal and potential resentencing." Marcus opened his briefcase again and withdrew a thick binder. This contains documented evidence of Judge Caldwell's pattern of bias. 47 comparative cases where black and white defendants received drastically different sentences for identical crimes. Statistical analysis showing systematic disparities. Audio recordings of private chambers conferences where Judge Caldwell revealed his true motivations. Caldwell finally found his voice, though it cracked with desperation. "This is entrapment, prosecutorial misconduct. I'll have your badge for this, Johnson." Marcus smiled calmly. "Your Honor, Your Honor, entrapment requires law enforcement to induce someone to commit a crime they wouldn't otherwise commit. I simply provided you the opportunity to demonstrate behavior you've exhibited consistently for 15 years." He advanced toward the bench, his prosecutor's instincts taking full control. "Would you like me to present specific examples?" Marcus Williams, age 19, first offense assault, 18 months county jail. Connor Bradley, age 20, identical charges, identical circumstances, 6 months probation. Malik Jefferson, college graduate, caught with personal use marijuana, 2 years state prison. Tommy Morrison, same charge, same amount, same lack of prior, diverted to drug court. With each comparison, Caldwell seemed to shrink deeper into his chair. "The pattern never varies, Judge Caldwell. Black defendants get prison. White defendants get second chances. Black families get lectured about moral foundations. Some white families get compassion about youthful mistakes." Marcus reached into his briefcase one final time and withdrew a small digital recorder. "But perhaps most damning of all are your own words recorded during private chamber conferences." He pressed play. Caldwell's voice filled the courtroom. "These people think they can waltz into my courtroom and demand special treatment. My grandfather didn't fight in World War II, so these criminals could lecture me about fairness." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Caldwell's court clerk stared at him with undisguised horror. "That recording," Marcus announced, "along with 46 hours of similar audio, has been submitted to the Federal Bureau of Investigation as evidence of systematic civil rights violations under Federal Statute 18 U.S.C. 242. Caldwell's lawyer, who had been frantically taking notes, looked up with the expression of someone realizing his client was beyond salvation. "Your Honor," the lawyer began weakly. "My client requests." "Your client," Marcus interrupted, "has no authority to request anything. He is now a defendant in a federal civil rights investigation. His only remaining authority is the right to remain silent, a right I strongly advise him to exercise." The gavel lay on the floor where Caldwell had dropped it. A fitting symbol of justice finally fallen into the right hands. The silence in the courtroom was so complete, you could hear the distant traffic humming outside. Marcus Johnson stood at the center of it all, his prosecutor's instincts fully unleashed after months of careful planning and years of watching justice perverted. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years prosecuting the state's most complex cases. What we have witnessed here today represents more than one judge's misconduct. It represents the systematic failure of our justice system to live up to its most fundamental promise, equal treatment under law. He turned toward the press gallery where every camera focused on his every word. For 15 years, Judge Richard Caldwell has weaponized the bench against black defendants. Not through overtly racist language. He was too clever for that. Instead, he used coded phrases, manufactured character assessments, and systematic sentence enhancements to ensure that justice in his courtroom was anything but blind. Caldwell's attorney, Robert Harrison, stood shakily. "Your Honor, I mean, Mr. Johnson, this is highly irregular. My client has not been formally charged, has not been read his rights." "Your client," Marcus replied without missing a beat, "spent 15 years denying those same rights to hundreds of defendants. But unlike Judge Caldwell, we will follow proper procedure." Marcus nodded toward the back of the courtroom. The doors opened and Agent Monica Rodriguez from the FBI entered, accompanied by 2 federal marshals and Assistant Attorney General Karen Webb. "Agent Rodriguez," Marcus announced, "please present the federal charges." Rodriguez stepped forward consulting an official document. "Richard Caldwell, by the authority of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the United States Department of Justice, you are hereby charged with conspiracy to deprive persons of their civil rights under color of law in violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 242. The words echoed through the chamber like gunshots. Caldwell's face had gone completely white, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the air conditioning. Furthermore, Rodriguez continued, you are charged with systematic abuse of judicial authority, violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and conspiracy to deny due process rights to defendants based on race. Caldwell tried to speak, but only a strangled whisper emerged. Assistant Attorney General Webb stepped forward. Mr. Caldwell, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. The irony was overwhelming. The man who had denied fairness to hundreds was now being afforded every protection he had systematically denied others. Marcus addressed the courtroom one final time as the lead prosecutor. The evidence against Judge Caldwell is overwhelming and undeniable. 6 months of investigation, 47 hours of recorded conversations, statistical analysis showing systematic bias, and now today's demonstration of that bias applied to a sitting prosecutor. He gestured toward the stack of evidence boxes that federal agents were now cataloging. Every case Judge Caldwell handled will be reviewed by independent counsel. Every defendant who was a victim of his discriminatory sentencing will have their case reviewed for potential resentencing or dismissal. This is not just about one corrupt judge. This is about restoring faith in our justice system. Channel 11's courthouse reporter stood up. Mr. Johnson, what will happen to Judge Caldwell's appellate court nomination? Marcus smiled grimly. As of 1 hour ago, that nomination was officially withdrawn. Judge Caldwell will never sit on a judicial bench again. The federal marshals stepped forward. Mr. Caldwell, please stand and place your hands behind your back. The transformation was complete. The man who had ruled his courtroom like a medieval lord was now being handcuffed in the very chamber where he had destroyed so many lives. As the handcuffs clicked shut, Caldwell finally found his voice. This is a witch hunt. I was tough on crime. I maintained order. I did what the community expected, You did what your prejudices demanded, Marcus interrupted. And now you'll face the same justice system you perverted, except you'll receive the due process you denied others. The federal agents began escorting Caldwell toward the side door. As they passed Marcus, the disgraced judge looked directly at him. I should have known, Caldwell whispered, his voice filled with bitter recognition. You were too calm, too composed. Real defendants break under pressure. Marcus met his gaze steadily. Real prosecutors don't break at all, Your Honor. We just build better cases. As Caldwell disappeared through the door, Marcus turned to address the remaining crowd. Today, justice won not because one prosecutor exposed one corrupt judge, but because our system ultimately worked. When institutions fail, individuals must step forward. When the powerful abuse their authority, the powerless must find ways to hold them accountable. The gallery erupted in applause, but Marcus raised his hand for silence. This victory belongs to every defendant who suffered under Judge Caldwell's bias. To every family torn apart by his prejudice, to every attorney who fought uphill battles in his courtroom, to every person who believes that justice should actually be blind. He gathered his materials and walked toward the exit. At the door, he paused and looked back at the empty judge's bench. 15 years of systematic injustice ends today. Tomorrow we start rebuilding trust. The gavel remained on the floor where Caldwell had dropped it. Marcus left it there. Some symbols, he reflected, were more powerful when broken. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the Attorney General's office on the 15th floor. Marcus Johnson adjusted his new nameplate, Deputy Attorney General, Civil Rights Division, and smiled at the irony. The man who had been sentenced to 60 days in jail was now the state's top prosecutor for civil rights violations. The transformation had been swift and decisive. Judge Richard Caldwell was serving 18 months in federal prison, the same facility where many of his victims had been unjustly incarcerated. His law license revoked, his pension stripped, his reputation destroyed so completely that even his country club had quietly revoked his membership. The Caldwell President, as law schools now called it, had revolutionized prosecutorial tactics nationwide. 17 states had adopted the Johnson Protocol, systematic investigations of judicial bias using statistical analysis, recorded evidence, and when necessary, first-hand documentation of discriminatory practices. Marcus opened his laptop and scrolled through the morning's case updates. 43 defendants had been resentenced after independent review. Malik Jefferson was completing his college degree, his conviction overturned entirely. Marcus Williams had received a gubernatorial pardon and was now studying law himself, inspired by Marcus's example. The knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Sarah Martinez entered, carrying a thick folder. "Boss, the Georgia Supreme Court just ruled on the Morrison case. Complete reversal with language specifically citing systematic judicial bias. Tommy Morrison's record is wiped clean." Marcus nodded, but his satisfaction was tempered by reality. "How many more cases are we reviewing?" 437 pending, with more being identified daily. The statistical team found patterns going back to Caldwell's first week on the bench. 437 lives damaged by one man's prejudice. The number still staggered him. His secure phone buzzed with a text from FBI agent Rodriguez. Caldwell's appeal denied. The federal circuit court upheld all convictions. Justice served. Marcus smiled and forwarded the message to Dr. Angela Foster, whose statistical analysis had provided the foundation for everything that followed. Her response came back immediately. "One down, too many more to go. Ready for the next case when you are the next case." Because Caldwell wasn't unique, he was just the first to be exposed using these methods. 3 other judges were now under investigation using the Johnson Protocol. The systematic nature of judicial bias was being revealed courthouse by courthouse, district by district. Marcus stood and walked to his window, looking down at the courthouse where it all began. A new judge, Patricia Williams, a young black woman with impeccable credentials, now presided over Caldwell's former courtroom. Early reports suggested a dramatic shift toward fairness and equality. His phone chimed with a news alert. Johnson Protocol adopted in federal courts nationwide. The article described how his innovative investigation techniques were being implemented across the justice system, creating accountability where none had existed before. Marcus picked up his phone and scrolled to his contacts. Time to record the video his staff had been requesting for weeks. "Good evening. I'm Marcus Johnson, Deputy Attorney General for Civil Rights. 6 months ago, I walked into a courtroom as a defendant and exposed 15 years of systematic racism disguised as justice." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that justice requires courage from all of us, then share it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories where the system works because people make it work. And remember, when institutions fail, individuals must rise. He smiled at the camera. Justice isn't just blind,